Hi, we're going to talk about strategic pay plans and how that motivates people and how we set things up so that we build people's careers and we build engagement into the plan as well. So let's need to share screen. And here we go. So once we've appraised and coached our employees, they need to be paid, right? And a good employer doesn't set pay arbitrarily. Each employee's pay should make sense in terms of what other employees earn. And it requires an overall plan. So in this chapter, we're going to show you how to establish that pay plan. And we're going to look at things like pay rates and job evaluations, market competitive pay plans, competency-based and traditional pay plans, and then total rewards for improving employee engagement. So the basic factors determining pay rates. Employee compensation refers to any form, all forms of pay or rewards going to employees. So both financial payments and indirect payments. So the basic factors in determining pay rates of employee compensation. So you've got the direct financial payments. So you've got wages, salaries, incentives, commissions, bonuses, those types of things. And then you've got the indirect financial payments. And that could be insurance, vacations, and it could be other things as well. But they are financial as well. So I have a friend that when she was younger and her children were little, part of her indirect financial benefit package was daycare for her children. So aligning total rewards with strategy is creating a compensation package that produces the employee behaviors the firm needs to achieve its competitive strategy. So put another way, the reward should provide a clear pathway between each reward and specific business goals. The equity theory of motivation postulates that people are motivated to maintain a balance between what they perceive as their contributions and their rewards. Equity theory states that if a person perceives an inequity, a tension or drive will develop that motivates him or her to reduce the tension and perceived inequity. So in compensation, one can address external and internal, individual and procedural equity. So external equity refers to how a job's pay rate in one company compares to the job's pay rate in other companies. Now, there's a drastic difference between the for-profit sector and the non-for-profit sector. So in some nonprofit sectors, the nonprofit sector pays about 60% of what the for-profit sector is. There are other nonprofit sectors that pay 30%. So knowing what that nonprofit sector pays across the board is very important, right? And for the potential employee to understand what that difference in pay is would be also very important. So external equity, then internal equity refers to how fair the job's pay rate is when compared to other jobs within the same company. So a sales manager's pay, when compared to the production manager. Is it fair? Is it equitable? And then individual equity refers to the fairness of an individual's pay as compared to with what his or her co-workers are earning for the same or very similar jobs within the company based on each person's performance. And then there's procedural equity, and that refers to the perceived fairness of the processes and procedures used to make decisions regarding the allocation of pay. So some legal considerations: employers do not have free rein in designing pay plans. Various laws specify things like minimum wages and overtime rates and benefits. So for example, the 1931 Davis-Bacon Act lets the Secretary of Labor set wage rates for laborers and mechanics employed by contractors working for the federal government. In 1936, Walsh-Healy Public Contract Act sets basic labor standards for employees working on any government contract that amounts to more than $10,000. It contains minimum wage, maximum hour, and safety and health provisions, and requires time and a half pay for work over 40 hours a week. Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act makes it unlawful for employers to discriminate against any individual with respect to hiring, compensation, terms, conditions, privileges of employment because of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. Other important legal considerations: the 1938 Fair Labor Standards Act, originally passed in 1938 and since amended many times, contains minimum wage, maximum hours, overtime pay, equal pay, record keeping, and child labor provisions that are familiar to most working people. It covers virtually all U.S. workers engaged in the production and or sale of goods for interstate and foreign commerce. In addition, agricultural workers and those employed by certain larger retail and service companies are included. State Fair Labor Standards laws cover most employers not covered by the Fair Labor Standards Act. And we refer to that as FLSA, by the way. One familiar provision governs overtime pay. In 2016, the Obama administration mandated new overtime rule exemptions. So anybody earning under $47,476 had to be paid overtime. A federal judge blocked the new overtime rule, and for now, the change is on hold. If an employee is exempt from the FLSA's minimum wage provisions, then he or she is also exempt from its overtime pay provisions. Wage stagnation has led to income inequality, according to some experts. There's many municipalities moving to raise local minimum wages. You hear a lot of talk about trying different states moving to different minimum wages. There's a push across the US to push that minimum wage up to $15 an hour. So you'll see some states like Texas are still at $7.25. And other states are up to like $12. And a lot of it has to do with standard of living, cost of living, and things like that. But there is still minimum wages is still a really big concern because anybody who lives on minimum wages is below poverty level, regardless of what state they're in. Then there's the exempt and non-exempt. So specific categories, so exempt from FLSA is exempt from overtime. So if you are exempt, your employer does not have to pay you overtime. So anybody who is salary does not get paid overtime, okay? And there is an expectation that if you are salaried, you are expected to work 45 to 60 hours a week. So there are employees who choose to stay at hourly wages because of the overtime. The Equal Pay Act of 1963 is an amendment to the FLSA, yeah, and states that employees of one sex may not be paid wages at a rate lower than that paid to employees of the opposite sex for doing roughly equivalent work. So specifically, if the work requires equal skills, effort, and responsibility, and involves similar working conditions, employees of both sexes must receive equal pay, unless the differences in pay stem from seniority, merit, or quantity or quality, or any factor other than sex. In 1974, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, or ERISA, is aimed at protecting employees' pensions. It provides for the creation of government-run employee finance corporations to protect employees against the failure of their employers' pension plans. It sets regulations regarding vesting rights. So vesting refers to the equity or ownership the employees build up in their pension plans should the employment terminate before retirement. And there are companies that still have pension plans, but most companies have gotten rid of it. Other legislation, the Age Discrimination Act, Employment Act prohibits age discrimination against employees who are 40 years of age and older in all aspects of employment, including compensation. The Americans with Disabilities Act prohibits discrimination against qualified persons with disabilities. The Family and Medical Leave Act aims to entitle eligible employees, both men and women, to take up to 12 weeks of unpaid job protected leave for the birth of a child or for the care of a child, spouse, or parent. And there are other executive orders that require employers that are federal government contractors or subcontractors to not discriminate in certain employment areas, including compensation. So each state has its own workers' compensation laws as well that you need to become aware of when you're working in that state. And then in 1935, there was the Social Security Act and amendments providing for unemployment compensation for workers unemployed through no fault of their own for up to 26 weeks. And then recently that was extended, and for retirement benefits. And then the federal wage garnishment law limits the amount of an employee's earnings that employers can withhold or garnish per week, and protects the worker from discharge during garnishment. Unions, so union influences on compensation decisions. The National Labor Relations Act of 1935, or Wagner Act, granted employees the right to unionize and to bargain collectively. Historically, the wage rate has been the main issue in collective bargaining, but unions also negotiate other pay related issues like time off with pay, income security, cost of living adjustments, health care benefits, and so on. The Wagner Act created the National Labor Relations Board to oversee employer practices and ensure that employees receive their rights. So the employer's compensation strategy will manifest itself in pay policies. The managers need pay policies on a range of issues. These would include, for example, how to set base salary, what employees can get, stock options, how to avoid salary increases, and whether to emphasize seniority or performance. Other pay policies cover how to award salary increases and promotions over overtime pay, probationary pay, leaves for military service, jury duty, holidays, and so on. Also, how to account for geographic differences in cost of living and other pay policies. So the job evaluation is very important in figuring out how to set that pay scale, because you're trying to figure out across the board the jobs in a company that are equal and that should have equal pay. So job evaluation then is that formal and systematic comparison of jobs to determine the worth of one job relative to another, and eventually results in a wage or salary structure or hierarchy. Employers use two basic approaches, either market-based approach or job evaluation method. A lot of firms, particularly smaller ones, will stick to market-based approach. And they will do a salary survey to find out what other companies are paying those jobs. The job evaluation methods then involve assigning values to each of the company's jobs and coming up with an equitable pay based on the type of responsibilities and jobs. So you can use two basic approaches to compare the worth of several jobs. First, you might decide that one job is more important than another and not dig any deeper. As an alternative, you could compare the jobs by focusing on certain basic factors the jobs have in common. Compensation management specialists call these compensable factors. So this is a fundamental compensable element of a job, such as skills, effort, responsibility, and working conditions. They are the factors that establish how the jobs compare to one another, and then determine how to pay for those types of things. So your job evaluation is a judgmental process and demands close cooperation among supervisors, HR specialists, and employees and union representatives if there is a union. The initial steps include identifying the need for the program, getting cooperation, and then choosing the evaluation committee. The committee then performs the actual evaluation, identifying the need for the job evaluation. And that part really shouldn't be that difficult. It's a matter of once you have the process established, every job goes through that same process. So employees may fear that a systematic evaluation of their jobs could reduce pay rates. So getting employees to evaluate and cooperate is important. And then choosing that job evaluation committee, you want to have good representation and then the committee usually identifies 10 to 15 key benchmark jobs. So the simplest job evaluation method is ranks each job relative to all other jobs, usually based on factors like job difficulty. And so you would obtain job information, select and group jobs, select compensable factors, rank jobs, combine ratings, compare current pay with what others are paying based on salary surveys, and assign a new pay scale. So here's an example of a job ranking at a hospital. So an office manager on current annual pay scale 43, what others pay from the survey 45, and the final assignment 44. Chief nurse, the current pay was 42.5, what others were paying was 43, and the final was 42,750. Bookkeeper was 34. They discovered it was 36, so final was 35. So you'll see that across the board, pretty much everybody got a raise. And so in this situation, everybody won out from this evaluation. And a lot of companies will do this, and they will make a statement that nobody's salaries will get cut. But if they're getting paid more, they might go up at a slower rate until everybody else catches up. So they might do things like that so that the employees aren't afraid that they'll get a job, a pay cut. So here's an example of a grade definition. They've got a job assignment and then the level of responsibility. And you guys can read this type of thing on your own. You can also do a job evaluation method on a point method. So the point method's overall aim is to determine the degree to which the jobs you're evaluating contain selected compensable factors. It involves identifying several compensable factors for the jobs, as well as the degree to which each factor is present in each job. It assumes there are 5 degrees of the compensable factor responsibility a job could contain, and then further assume you assign a different number of points to each degree of each compensable factor. So you would do this evaluation. There's a packaged point plan. So a number of groups, such as the Hay groups, the National Electric Manufacturers Association. So there are standard point plans out there that you can like borrow from and compare your company to. And this, the US government general schedule is one such example. So how to establish a market competitive pay plan. So in a market competitive pay plan, a job's compensation reflects the job's value in the company, as well as what other employers are paying for similar jobs in the marketplace. Because the point method or point factor method is so popular, we're going to use this as an example here. So the 16 steps in creating a market competitive pay plan start with 1, choose the benchmark jobs. So particularly when an employer has dozens or hundreds of different jobs, it's impractical and unnecessary to evaluate each of them separately. So the first step in the point method is to select benchmark jobs. And then number 2, select compensable factors. So the choice of compensable factors depends on tradition and on strategic and practical considerations. The employer should carefully define each factor, and this is to ensure that the evaluation committee members will each apply the factors with consistency. Number 3, assign weights to compensable factors. So having selected the factors, the next step is to determine the relative importance or weighting of each factor. So for example, how much more important is skill than effort? This is important because for each cluster of jobs, some factors are bound to be more important than others. Then number 4, convert percentages to points for each factor. So next we want to convert the percentage weights assigned to each compensable factor into point values for each factor. It's traditional to assume we are working on a total of 1,000 points, although you could use a different number. To convert percentages to points, of course, you're multiplying by 1,000. Then number 5, define each factor's degrees. This is when you will split each factor into degrees and define each degree so that raters may judge the amount or degree of the factor existing in a job. Number 6, determine for each factor its factor degree points. The evaluation committee must be able to determine the number of points each job is worth. So to do this, the committee must be able to examine each job and from each factor's degree definitions, determine what degree of each compensable factor that job has. For them to do this, we must first assign points to each degree of each compensable factor. Number 7, review descriptions and job specifications. So the heart of the job evaluation involves determining the amount of or degree to which the job contains the selected factors, such as effort, job complexity, and working conditions. The team conducting the job evaluation will frequently do so by first reviewing each job's job description and job specification. Then number 8, evaluate the jobs. So steps number 1 to 7 provide us with the information based on which we can evaluate the jobs. The committee has gathered the job descriptions and job specifications for the benchmark jobs they will focus on. Now evaluate the job. With the market competitive pay system, the employer's actual pay rates and competitive with those in the relevant labor market as well as equitable internally. So put simply, this basic approach is to compare what the employer is currently paying for each job, internal pay, with what the market is paying for the same job, external pay, and then to combine this information to produce a market competitive pay system. So then now step 9, draw the current internal wage curve. Okay, so first you're going to study how each job's points relates to its current pay rate. And we draw an internal wage curve, plotting each job's points and the wage rate the employer is now paying for each job or wage rates. And then number 10, conduct a market analysis or salary survey. And we collect external wage and we plot those and create the external curve. In number 11, okay, once we have that external curve, we're going to compare and adjust the current and market wage rates for jobs. So we're going to compare the two curves, and we're going to determine where we stand. Okay. And we must decide whether to adjust the current pay rates for our jobs, and if so, how. Step 13, develop pay grades. Employers typically group similar jobs in terms of points into grades for pay purposes. Then, instead of having to deal with hundreds of job rates, you might only have to focus on, say, pay rates for 10 or 12 pay grades. A pay grade is composed of jobs of approximately equal difficulty or importance as determined by job evaluation. And then 14, establish rate ranges. So most employers do not pay just one rate for all jobs in a particular pay grade. You're going to have some kind of a range. And most of the time, people will start at a lower end, and it gives you flexibility for advancement within that range. Step 15, address the remaining jobs that don't fit into those grades that you just created. And we can do this in two ways. We can evaluate each of the remaining jobs using the same process, or we can simply slot the remaining jobs into the wage structure where we feel they belong without a formal evaluation. And then 16, correct out of line rates. So this means that the average pay for that job is currently too high or too low relative to other jobs in the firm. For underpaid jobs, the solution is clear: raise the wage for underpaid employees. If we have overpaid, then we usually have to freeze the rate for those employees to bring them into line. Or we legitimately promote the employees into a legitimate pay so that they are not getting overpaid for that position. But that means that they get promoted and they're not going to get that much of a pay raise. And that can create another set of problems. Improving performance. HR tools for line managers and small businesses. There are quite a few tools out there that employers can use to track and keep track of these workable plans. And in HR, there are a number of programs that you can work with. So one of the programs that I really like is called ONET, OStarNet, and jobdescription.com. So check those out and spend some time looking at them, because you'll learn a lot by looking at these. There's another tool that I use quite a bit for job descriptions, and it gives you pay ranges and stuff. And it's put out by the US government, and it's Occupational Outlook Handbook. And then if you want to know salary ranges based on job titles, go to salary.com. You can put a title in, a job title in, and a zip code, and it will tell you what the average pay is It will give you a bell curve and what the average sick pay is in that area. And those are based on surveys and publicly available documents. Okay, so how to price managerial and professional jobs. So developing compensation plans for managers and professionals is similar in many respects than for any other employee. And the basic aim is the same: to attract, motivate, and retain good employees. And job evaluation is about as applicable to managerial and professional jobs as to production and clerical ones. There are some big differences, though. Managerial jobs tend to be to stress harder to quantify factors like judgment and problem solving than production and clerical. And there's more emphasis on paying managers and professionals based on their performance rather than on job demands and working conditions. So whatever it is that accounts for CEO pay, it's apparently not always company performance. So job complexity, the employer's ability to pay, the executive's human capital, like their educational level, the field of study, the work experience, account for about 2/3 of the executive compensation variance. So in practice, external equity plays a big role in setting top managers' compensation plan. So a lot of times for compensating top executives, there's a base pay. And then there's short-term incentives like cash or stock bonuses for achieving short-term goals, long-term incentives, like giving them the right to purchase stocks at a specific price or for a specific period, and then executive benefits and perks like retirement pension plans or supplemental executive plans. And I don't know, my sister-in-law is a COO, and when she travels, she has rights to the corporate jet. She doesn't have rights for vacation time to use it. Only the owners can use it for vacation, but she can travel anytime she's on a business trip. She can book the corporate jet. She has other perks like when they have vacation spots and she can stay at those vacation spots for free. The owners own different locations and she can stay there. So there's a lot of other perks like that. I've had friends from my MBA program that part of their negotiated benefits package was a week in the summer and a week in the winter at a ski resort, because the company owned a chalet up in a ski resort. And so she negotiated a week, summer and winter, that she could stay there. So there's a lot of different things that people at the executive level will negotiate, but be very careful with tax issues and securities laws in those benefits. So compensating professional employees. So the Fair Labor Standards Act provides an exemption from both minimum wage and overtime pay for employees employed as bona fide executive, administrative, professional, and outside sales employees. However, calling someone a professional doesn't make him or her one. So in addition to earning at least $455 per week, the person's main duty must be performance of work requiring advanced knowledge, and the advanced knowledge must be customarily acquired by prolonged course of specialized intellectual instruction. So analytical jobs, highly specialized, highly sensitive knowledge, etc., puts you in that category. So then the differences between competency-based and traditional pay. Contemporary topics in compensation. There's competency-based pay, there's broad banding, comparable worth, board oversight of executive pay, and total reward. So we're going to look at those 5. Competencies are demonstrable personal characteristics such as knowledge, skills, and personal behaviors. Competency-based pay means that companies pay for the employee's range, depth, and types of skills and knowledge, rather than for the job title he or she holds. So competency-based pay usually comes down to pay for knowledge or skill-based pay. And it usually has like 5 elements. The employer defines specific required skills and chooses the methods for basing the person's pay on those skills. So a training system lets employees acquire the skills. There's a formal competency testing system, and the work is designed so that the employees can easily move among the jobs with varying skills levels. So broad banding means collapsing salary grades into just a few wide levels or bands that contain a relatively wide range of jobs. So here's this illustration of how they do broad banding. Comparable worth refers to the requirement to pay men and women equal wages for jobs that are dissimilar but of comparable value. So this may mean comparing dissimilar jobs such as nurses to truck mechanics. Should you pay women who are performing jobs equal to men's or just comparable to men's the same as men? Okay, and there are so many cases along this line. Your book has a bunch of examples. Board oversight or executive pay. So the company's board of directors is responsible for setting and approving top executives' pay. Today, boards are scrutinizing the pay for 2 reasons: governmental regulation, legal and shareholder activism, and inequality. So legislation gives various governmental agencies oversight over executive pay. The Securities and Exchange Commission requires filing detailed compensation-related information, including a listing of all individual perks or benefits if they total more than $100,000. The Dodd-Frank law of 2010 requires that American companies give shareholders a say on pay. So law firms are filing class action suits demanding information from companies about their senior executive pay decisions. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act makes executives personally liable under certain conditions for corporate financial oversight lapses. So yeah, if a company makes a bad decision, the CEO, the C-suite is actually liable. So they do need to be aware and be involved in the company. So then the total rewards for improving employee engagement. Companies are aware that whatever they do in the area of setting these engagements, setting their rewards program, will actually motivate or demotivate their employees. And understanding what is important to their employees is vital to establishing not only the actual pay rates, but everything else that goes into the compensation plan. So your total rewards program and that that engagement program. So more and more today, companies are giving employees choices in the total compensation. And by doing that, allowing the employees a lot more flexibility. So that's a lot of information. That's a lot of things to cover, but I hope that it gives you a big picture of all that goes into making the decision of how much someone actually gets paid.